Let's get started with market structures. This is definitely the most assessed topic in the entirety of the A level, so you need to make sure you are solid on this. Let's start with the first market structure, and definitely the most common one. It has to be monopolies. In your exams, knowing real world application is absolutely necessary, especially if you want those A/A star marks. So during this series, I'm going to try give you as much application as possible. A great example is Google, where they dominate the search engine market with over 90% market share. Moving on to the second market structure. This is perfectly competitive markets. Now, we'll learn a wide range of information about perfectly competitive markets, but at its fundamental level, I want you to remember that perfectly competitive markets is a theoretical concept. It does not exist, it does not operate in the real world. And this is due to its unrealistic characteristics, such as a market having no barriers to entry, as even some of the easiest markets to enter, for example, opening an eBay shop, still, even if it's a tiny degree, it still has some sort of barrier to entry. So, when we provide examples of perfectly competitive markets, they are not pure perfectly competitive markets, they are just quite close to being a perfectly competitive market, as close as possible in the real world, you could say. And the closest real world example of a perfectly competitive market would be agricultural markets. Third market structure is monopolistic competition. Now, when the spec started in around 2015, this wasn't assessed much, but now, year on year, in exam papers, monopolistic competition is getting more and more popular and appearing more frequently. And a great example you should definitely remember in the UK, hairdressers. So there's around 46,000 hairdressers in the UK in 2021, and they are monopolistically competitive. Now, this particular bit of application, I actually remember writing down in my real A-level paper 1. A little side task you can do now is pause the video and ask yourself, why are hairdressers monopolistically competitive, and why do they exhibit the features of a monopolistically competitive market? Leave your answer in the comments. And the last market structure, an absolute giant which you'll get sick of hearing about, has to be oligopolies. And an example you are quite likely to get maybe in your case study, in your extracts, during your paper 1 or maybe in paper 3 has to be about supermarkets. So there are 4 large supermarkets in the UK, and these form an oligopolistic market structure, and these have a concentration ratio of around 66%. These 4 supermarkets will be Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda and Morrison's. Now, each of these market structures have distinctive characteristics that they differ on. The first one of these is the number of buyers and sellers. For example, the market structures such as monopolies, oligopolies will have a large number of buyers compared to a perfectly competitive market which will have a low number of buyers. Secondly, we have barriers to entry and exit. Then we have similarity of product. This means if the goods are same, we call them homogeneous, and if the goods are different, we would simply say they are differentiated. Then lastly, knowledge. This refers to the level of information in the market, so whether there's perfect information or imperfect information. Now, at one point or another, you are going to have to define monopolies. That might come in a small answer question, or it might come at the start of your essays. So let's start with defining a pure monopoly. This is when there is one firm in the market with 100% market share. This is not seen at all anymore, but a great example of when this was seen was back in the day, back in 1985, where Microsoft used to dominate the computer industry. But since pure monopolies are almost non-existent now, let's move on to defining a more realistic type of monopoly that actually exists in day-to-day life, which would be a legal monopoly. The way we define legal monopolies is a firm with over 25% market share, and one of the biggest everyday firms that we see that is a legal monopoly has to be Tesco, and Tesco has over 28% market share. Now, it's great being able to recall the definitions, but at A level, you're going to be expected to be able to recall and apply diagrams. So let's move on to the monopoly diagram. So, monopoly diagram. The first thing you always need to start with is your axes. So your y and your x. And the way you remember your y is y to the sky. But on your y-axis in monopoly diagrams would of course be cost, revenue. You can write cost slash rev, doesn't really matter. And on your x-axis will be quantity. Now, labeling your axes is such a common mistake students forget to do, and that straight away subconsciously tells your examiner whether you're a low level student or a high level student, because it's only low level students which will make the mistake of maybe forgetting the labels or just not labeling at all. But a high level student, because you've done it so many times, because you've done so many diagrams, you're never going to mistake your labels or forget your labels. So just make sure always first thing on diagrams, drawing is your axis. So my approach to diagrams was a very systematic approach. So I used to draw the same curves at the same point in time, and I'll show you what this means. So firstly, let's start with our demand curve. So of course, just straight demand curve, and in monopolies we said this demand curve equals AR, with AR being average revenue. Then we have our MR curve, our marginal revenue curve, and the only rule for this is twice as steep as the AR curve. And as you can also see, it starts from the same point as your AR curve. Then we have our average cost curve, or our AC curve. Most of you will remember this from the economies of scale topic. And then lastly, you have your MC curve. The only rule with the MC curve is that it needs to intersect the AC curve at its lowest point. Now, this doesn't have to be perfect, just try to do your best. So, they are all the curves of the monopoly diagram. So we have our D equals AR, so demand equals average revenue. We have our marginal revenue, our average cost, and our marginal cost. Now, this is what I meant by the systematic approach. I used to do the same curves at the same point in time. So always demand equals AR first, and always last was MC. This meant, firstly, I could become more efficient, so I could just draw it a lot faster because I knew what curves are going where, and I never mistaked it because I always knew my first curve is always going to be D equals AR, my third curve is always going to be AC, so it became almost muscle memory. Now, although these are all the curves finished, there's a bit more we add to the monopoly diagram, and this is known as the profit maximization point. Now, one of the main assumptions we make in monopolies is that they are profit maximizers, and the condition they do this at is called MC equals MR. So it's just where these two curves intersect. Where your marginal cost intersects your marginal revenue, this is the point where firms profit maximize. And if we had to label that on the diagram, where is MC? MC is here. Where is MR? MR is here. Therefore, our profit maximization point is just where the green and the red line intersect, and so that black circle. Now, from here, we want to find the price at where a firm profit maximizes and the quantity where a firm profit maximizes. Let's start with the quantity. All we need to do to find the quantity is go straight down from the black circle. So, just as I do, I would do this with a ruler, but because I'm filming the video, I don't have to. So, we label this. This is the quantity at where firms profit maximize, so this will be Qmax. Now, that's our quantity done. Now we want to find the price. The main thing with the price, you go from where the black circle is, and you continue to go up until you hit your demand equals AR curve. So until you hit it, which is at that point. Now, once I've hit it, it will go left. This will now tell me the price at where this firm will profit maximize, which I'll label Pmax. Now, lastly, you want to see where these firms' profits are. So what you need to do now is go from that same point, from that Qmax point, and keep going up until you hit your cost curve, until you hit your average cost curve. So I'd keep going up from there, and then go left, this point here. Why? Because at this point, I've now hit my average cost curve. Go left, and let me just do that with the pen. And now this point here, this box now we've made, this box here, is what we would label, this is a box of supernormal profit in monopolies. Now, later on, we'll add a bit more to the diagram in terms of efficiency, but for the most part and for most questions, this is all you're going to need to know for the monopoly diagram. So, just a quick recap of everything I've said. So, firstly, of course, on your y-axis, cost/revenue, on your x-axis, quantity. Then we have the systematic approach I was referring to, which is drawing the same curves at the same time. So, firstly, you have your demand curve, then you have your MR curve, then your AC, and then lastly, your MC curve. And then also just the little rules associated with them, with the MR being twice as steep and MC, of course, intersecting AC at its lowest point. Lastly, remember you need to add your profit maximization point. So again, this is where MC equals MR, then you go down from there to find the Qmax quantity, then you go up from that Qmax price until you hit your AR curve, then go left, which will give you your price, which is Pmax. Then lastly, just making sure you're labeling your box of supernormal profit.